over to you, Kevin.
Bosh. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar about Ramadan and football in 2023. So the webinar will be held. We have Millie from Essex FA, who is on the decks, and we have Aaron Williams, special guest from PGMOL, and my name is Kevin Coleman, and I used to, I'll give you a quick background now. I used to work in sport for 23 years at Kick It Out at the FA and Brentford Football Club, working in diversity and inclusion. And this area is a specialist area for me, being Muslim myself. Maybe I'll let Aaron do a really quick intro and bio about himself.
Thanks for that, Kevin. So good evening, everyone. My name's Aaron Williams. I'm the PGMOL's EDI manager, having formerly held the position of EDI manager at the FA and been at a number of other posts across a very different number of key stakeholders in football. I'm a level 3 or step 3-4 referee in the men's pyramid, and I'm delighted to be with you all tonight to share some of the insights that we will.
Brilliant. And Millie, do you want to just tell everyone who you are in case they don't know already?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Evening, everybody. My name's Millie Morgan. I'm the Equality and Inclusion Officer at Essex FA. We just want to thank you all for being here this evening. It's really important to us that we get the message out there and share the message around further education, especially within the EDI space. So taking the time just to commit to learning is really important. So yeah, over to you, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks. And actually, as we've been saying that, I've noticed we said that football's for all. And if you check our backdrops, Millie's got her Essex FA hoodie on. Aaron has got PGMO pro refs in the background, and I've got a picture of some refugees playing football in Lebanon. So even subconsciously, we're trying to make sure football's for all. So let's, without further ado, go to the first slide. Okay, so this is about Ramadan. Ramadan, we'll talk about exactly what that is, but Ramadan is something that's celebrated, observed by Muslims. So who are Muslims? They are people who follow the religion of Islam. They make up around a quarter of humanity, so that's around 2 billion people. And this is a bit of a detail, but it's an interesting one. They're split into 2 main groups, Sunni and Shia Muslims. The difference between them is they interpret the Quran, which is the holy book of Muslims, just like the Bible for Christians. They interpret what happened in history a very slightly different way. But outside of that, they practice and observe Islam and Ramadan 95% the same way. Muslims can come from any country, and that's one aspect of Islam that's quite interesting, that any country you go to in the world, there are black, Asian, white Muslims, but most Muslims come from Asian or African countries. In the UK, most Muslims are British Muslims. That means they aren't people who have emigrated here. They're people who have been born here and generations of their family have been brought up here. And that's happened over several generations, decades, even hundreds of years. The first mosque, I think, was built in England about 150 years ago. Around 6.5% of England and Wales is Muslim, and that's from the latest 2021 census. So a fairly big number of people. And across Essex, there's around 1.5% of people. But obviously, the closer you get to London and some of the metropolitan boroughs, the more diverse it gets. So if you get to, say, Tower Hamlets, it's around 35%, with most of those people being Bangladeshi. And you get similar stats for Newham, Redbridge, and Barking. So let's go, and there's East London Mosque. You can see that picture there. That's one of the biggest mosques in the UK. So if you look at this next slide, this is a bit of a heat map for the Muslim population of London. So obviously Essex, football in Essex is mainly concerned with the east side of that, but obviously people travel from across the city to play in different leagues. So I thought that might be a useful graphic, and you can see most of those people, those populations are in the north, and to the northeast-ish you got some more dense places. If you look there, there's a link, Muslims in Britain. There's a website which is run by one volunteer, but he's been tracking the profile of British Muslims and where they're from and some of their heritage for years and years and years. So it's a really interesting website if you want to find out more. So let's go to the next slide. So what is Islam? As I said before, Islam is the religion that Muslims follow. It's one of the Abrahamic religions, so that means it's one of 3 religions with Christianity and Judaism who all follow the same God, even though there are different names for it because basically people speak different languages. People who follow Islam, the word Muslim means to submit or surrender, and there are 5 main pillars. We won't go into too much detail, but it might be useful to know. In Islam, there are 5 main pillars of the religion. One is the Shahada, which is declaration. So that is people saying, I believe in Islam. They say that I believe there is one God and that the Prophet Muhammad is his messenger. The second one is called Salat. So this is in Arabic, and in English that means prayer. So it's written in the Quran that Muslims should pray 5 times a day. They're quite short prayers, and there are lots of reasons why you don't have to, you know, if you're ill, if you're traveling, but generally speaking, people try to. The third pillar is Sawn, or in English that means fasting, and that's where Ramadan comes in. So for a month of the year, Muslims will fast between dawn and dusk, and we'll go into more detail later. A pilgrimage, which many religions follow. There's a pilgrimage to Hajj, which is to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and if Muslims can afford it, they should do that once in their lifetime. And something called zakat, which means charity. So every year Muslims should, if they can afford it, give a minimum of 2.5% of their wealth to charity. So that's it, a sort of whistle-stop tour. The main book where all of this comes from is the Quran. Just like in Christianity, the Bible is seen as the word of God, so is the Quran. And there are lots of different ways, because it's written in Arabic, of interpreting this. But most of the above is pretty standard and what everyone pretty much agrees on. If you've got any questions about this or anything else, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So you can put them in the chat now if you want, or just wait till the end. So that is what Islam is. So if we go to the next slide. So this is what Ramadan is. So it's one of the pillars of Islam, and it's a pretty big month. And the reason why that we're featuring this in a webinar, although we can talk about other religious festivals, for example, Easter or Christmas or Yom Kippur, most of those festivals are probably one day in duration and wouldn't have a massive impact on football. I know a lot of leagues might miss Easter because there's a couple of days there, and it's usually quite well known and well established. But Ramadan is a whole 30 days, give or take. Sometimes it's 29, so it can have a more significant impact on football. So it's the ninth month in the Islamic calendar and one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It lasts 1 lunar month, which is why we don't know exactly how long it is. It could be 29 or 30 days. So it depends on when the full moon starts. And its start and ending dates are determined by the setting of the moon. So it even goes up to the day before Ramadan starts. People will be around the world standing in mosques looking at the sky with telescopes. Now, we're at a stage in 2023 where we have technology that can tell us years and years in advance. And we do know when the dates are, but people are very traditional and they still like to do it the old-fashioned way. So that's why you'll see this is often not announced until the day before. And it's famous within Muslim communities that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia often disagree on when it starts. So because it's also a lunar year, that means that it's earlier every year. So this is why it changes. So it's around 11 days earlier each year. This year, it will be from the 22nd of March to the 21st of April, those 30 days. So bang in towards the business end of the football season. So we know it will overlap on county cups and the end of the season, which is why it's quite important for you to know. And also because it goes 10 to 11 days earlier each year, it will continue to overlap on the football season for the next 10 to 20 years. So what happens during Ramadan? So during daylight hours, adult Muslims, so this means anyone past the age of puberty, will abstain from eating, drinking, smoking. So the comment that often happens is, what, no water? And yes, that's right, no liquids or food at all from between daylight hours. Now this, there are lots of caveats to that. If people are on certain medications, if they're ill, if they're traveling, if they're elderly or vulnerable, but that's probably not one for you to worry about. You know, if people are fasting, they'll tell you, they'll be happy to tell you, and if they're not, they'll say they're not. So as we said there are lots of caveats written into the Quran as to why people might not be fasting. And of course, like all faiths, people observe in different ways. Some people are more observant than others. Some people will go to mosque once a year at Eid, and some people will go all the time. So it's really down to the individual how they interpret and how they observe. But we're giving you the sort of the version from the book. So this is the official version, and then everyone else can sort of interpret however they like. Cool. And so next slide. So what do Muslims do in Ramadan? So one thing that's important to note is that although people fast, and it's a very big part of it, you know, it requires a lot of self-discipline. It's more a month where people focus on their faith. So as well as not eating, people will be thinking about their faith more. They'll be visiting the mosque more. They'll be spending more time with their families. And of course, if you're not eating and you're trying to be disciplined yourself, it gives you more time to reflect and think about that. So the fasting times towards the beginning of Ramadan will be from around 5 a.m. This is on the 22nd of March to 7:30 p.m. So quite a long day. But towards the end, a month later, it will be even longer, from 3:30 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. So people will probably be quite tired towards the end of those days and towards the end of Ramadan. As I say, people spend more time praying in the mosque with family, resting. Some people might take a lot of time off work, or some people like to simply get on with work, and they find that they're more productive. It's always surprising how much time we spend eating, drinking, and drinking tea especially. Children are less likely to fast, so that will have an impact on youth football. But as I say, this is an area where there's quite a lot of variety of what people believe. So even though it's stated that people should probably start fasting after puberty, there are a lot of children and families who do start younger. Kids are always watching the adults fast and they want to join in. So it's down to people how they do that, and you can only find out by asking. Football wise, which is obviously why we're here today, some people won't play at all. You know, they may decide they want the whole month off to be focused on their faith, or they might decide they're just too tired and it's too much. Some people will carry on regardless and won't even mention it, and there'll be a lot of people who will just be somewhere in between. I guess the most relevant to you is people who want to adjust their timetable. They might want to adjust kickoff times, they might want to postpone matches, or they might request kickoff times change so it can fit in with fasting times. And that's where dialogue and communication is really, really important. And hopefully if you've listened to this webinar, you can go into those discussions with your eyes a bit more wide open, and you'll sort of be a bit more aware of why people are asking for that. But the key takeaway here is people will practice in different ways. Whilst this is a good blueprint to start from, it's down to not even just communities, but each individual as to how they practice. And it will be for teams to tell you what they would like to do, because they will have a variety of practicing people even within their teams. Just want to check in with Aaron here. Is there anything you've had from your experience, whether in the pro or grassroots game, where you've seen sort of the variety in different people and how they practice?
Yeah, definitely. And what comes to mind immediately is an example involving a referee in the semi-professional game who will, during certain hours of the year, be unavailable to officiate football because of the traditional kind of 2:30, 3 o'clock kickoff. So one of his prayer times will fall, roughly speaking, on or around half time, meaning obviously that the half time period is impacted upon by that. But then we'll reopen their availability in the other times of the year to allow them, because of the position of the moon that you mentioned earlier and things of that nature, to allow them to be involved in refereeing and support that. And it's just, I think it's really important for us to be aware of that and how that might how we might be able to support someone who is in that situation, because actually that referee initially felt like they were having to give having to give up refereeing completely, and by having the conversation with us, they were able to stay on and continue officiating at the level they're at.
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, and that sort of reminded me of the clubs or teams or players could come to you, and they might want to adjust kickoff times or half time to be extended or shortened, partly because of breaking fast, or partly because of prayer, because people are more likely to want to pray and do the full 5 prayers, and that might fall within half time, for example, or it might be to get away slightly earlier to get to the mosque. People often either go to family houses or to the mosque to pray, to break fast together in big groups. So it's a real community time. Let's go to the next slide.
That's already up for you, Kevin.
Oh, magic. So how can this affect clubs and, by different definition, referees? So again, players might not want to play at all. As I say, some people just won't want to play. One interesting thing is that people who do fast, and Ramadan is something that is embedded in the culture. It's a given, and people know it's happening. They'll often, it might slip their mind around the dates, which is why they sometimes need to be reminded by us and the league. But they'll know it's coming, and whatever they do, they'll pretty much do every year. If there's someone that fasts fully, they'll probably fast. If there's someone that doesn't and continues to play football. So if you do have the chance to communicate with them, they'll probably know in advance what they're going to do during Ramadan. But obviously, because the dates change and because people have busy lives, sometimes they might not let you know in advance. They might request a kickoff time around prayer and iftar. So iftar is the word for breaking fast. So iftar is the time when people come together. They'll usually break fast with something small like water, dates, or fruit, because obviously people's stomach do shrink during Ramadan, and people find it difficult to eat a lot of food. So they have lots of small plates, a little bit like tapas in Spain. And players, if they want to carry on, people love their football and they often try and combine everything in their lives. You might remember the Tunisia game at the last World Cup. When I say last World Cup, the one before, where iftar time was during one of the matches, and you might remember the goalkeeper suddenly completely distant from any other players fell down injured, in order that the whole team could run to the side and grab some dates and some water. And it was quite a funny scene. So if you look it up, the player was on his own and the goalkeeper just lay down on the floor rolling around. So people will go to extraordinary lengths to try and break fast. So if you can be really helpful and progressive like the PGMO have been the last couple of years, and they've spoken to both sets of teams and both managers, they've known exactly when time is to break fast, and it's all been pre-arranged, and it's gone so smoothly that lots of viewers and observers hadn't even noticed it happened. So it is possible for football and faith to go hand in hand, and for everyone to be happy. Some players won't want to train, so that's one of the I guess compromises. So I used to work at Brentford Football Club, and there was a player, Ben Rama, who's now at West Ham, who fasted every day during Ramadan, and he simply changed his training and diet routine. Did this in collaboration with the club, and he often stated that he actually played better during Ramadan, which is quite hard to get your head around, when you're not eating or drinking anything for 10 to 15 hours a day. But people can be so focused, sometimes they feel like mentally they're a bit more focused. Obviously you can lose a little bit of weight, which can be helpful for some people, and some people will simply play. I think where it's definitely worth asking is around youth football, around that age of puberty when you're not really sure. Kids are less likely to fast, and then of course they're mad keen on football. So it's always worth talking to them, the manager and the parents, to find out what they want to do, because obviously we have a safeguarding obligation to make sure we're doing the right thing by them. So as I just said, there's no set age for Muslims to start fasting. It's generally post-puberty, but it can. So my children are 10 and 12, and they will do a half day, for example. They might miss out on lunch, or they might do one day here or there. Most parents obviously want the best for their children, want them to be healthy, so they let them join in without doing the full fast. But it depends on the family, how observant they are and what their traditions are. But all the age groups, especially when you get into 17, 18, 19, are much more likely to be doing the same as adults. Okay, next slide. So how will this affect leagues? So as I say, different clubs will be impacted differently. It's because we're right at this business end of the season with the county cups. It's definitely worth speaking to clubs well in advance. Obviously, people don't know how they're gonna do in the cups, but you wouldn't want a situation where one team was in the semi-final, for example, and then had to pull out because the dates are set. So one thing that's quite common is around county cups, I think, is that county FAs will often book venues well in advance, and there's obviously a cost attached to that. And you wouldn't want someone to have to miss out on a cup final or someone get a bye because you can't then change the date or the venue. One interesting scenario, which is one we don't actually have an answer for, is when you have a team which has a mixture of Muslim and non-Muslim players, or players who are fasting or not. Whilst under the rules, which you're going to see in a second, you can't compel anyone to play on a day of bona fide religious observance. So that's for any faith, and and if you ever have a situation, not just with Ramadan, where a player of faith says they need to observe that date, generally speaking, we'd say you just simply have to trust that they're telling you the truth. There's no way of really checking, and generally speaking, in our experience, people wouldn't come to you with that sort of request. 99% of people wouldn't do that sort of thing. There are some things that people will try one on, I'm sure, as you know, in years of refereeing, but around their faith, it's usually a line people don't want to cross. But in this case, it's really unusual because there are sometimes a team will have 1 or 2 players missing, sometimes up to 10, and it can often depend on who the players are. If your star striker is missing, someone will want to miss a game, but if half your squad is missing and they're not the best players, people might not be bothered. So it's very much on a case-by-case basis, and the only thing we can really recommend is that you speak to the clubs with an open mind. Make sure the other clubs are informed. So sometimes clubs might not be impressed with a last-minute change, but if you explain to them why, people are usually pretty understanding, and they'll be happy to come to some sort of compromise. What should we do as referees? Well, the FA has created a really helpful fact sheet. Aaron and I created those many moons ago. And actually, most of that advice still stands true, even though the players in the pictures are a little bit dated. And checking in with your leagues and clubs in advance whether they need adjustments is really, really key. I'm going to ask Aaron again, because I know the PGO has been quite open and responsive around this. Have you noticed anything at the PGMO in the last couple of years around Ramadan and awareness?
Yeah, so a couple of bits to kind of address there with you, Kevin. So going back to the league point a moment ago, I think from my experience at the FA previously and across the county FAs that I worked at, actually going and speaking to your clubs. So Kevin's outlined earlier about how Ramadan, we know, will happen every year. We roughly speaking will know the times and dates. Can you, at the AGM, at the start of the season, propose that to the clubs? Don't wait for people to come to you. Be proactive with it. Be respectful and ask that question. Actually, what's your thoughts around Ramadan? Do you want us to look at postponing your fixtures? Because the fixture secretary can do that there and then and get that work done, rather than waiting until February, March time. And then, as Kevin referred to, you find yourself in a position where actually now we're having to make last minute changes. People are really concerned about it. Similarly for county FAs, one of the county FAs near us, Manchester, at the beginning of the county cup period, canvassed its entire football club sections that were part of the county cups, right from the very senior to the youngest age groups, and said, right, if you happen to make it to a final, a semi-final, or even a quarter-final, I believe, how would you like this to progress? Is there a chance that you would like these games to fall on a certain date, move to certain times? They use their inclusion advisory group to support them with that canvassing. And again, they came back with an answer that was good for everybody and gave everybody ample amount of time to make those plans and put them into place. So try and get this in as early would be my advice, and try and make sure you speak to the people who it will most likely impact in that sense. Now, from a refereeing point of view, Kevin touched upon the Ramadan fact sheet, which is a fantastic piece of informative document to support you. But actually, there's a number of other documents that the FA have created as well to support you as club officials, as referees, as people involved in the game, volunteers, maybe even parents or players yourselves. And with that, there is the belief in the game document that talks about things like articles of faith. So we might see a person of faith wearing an article of faith, and what we would do as referees, you have to refer to this guide to make sure that you are in a position of knowledge, so that when someone comes to you and says, this person is wearing something that we feel is unsafe, please can you check it, you're able to go, actually, no, checked it off, it's an article of faith, we're happy for that to continue. What we mustn't do as match officials, though, is make that assumption without speaking to those people. What we mustn't do as match officials is say, actually, I don't care if that's an article of faith, take it off. That cannot happen, and there's been some significant training and guidance given to match officials by the FA to address that. You may have seen that recently around the PATCA as well. And from a PGMOL perspective, Kevin, we recently became the first refereeing body to work in partnership with Nudgem Sports to adopt the Muslim Athlete Charter. And within that was about changing a number of different elements of the way we work. So, for example, the food we might provide, the training space, the prayer space we offer to our Muslim match officials, however many there might be. It's about making sure they feel included. And I'm delighted that we'll be at the Nudgem Sport annual conference for Ramadan in a few weeks, along with a number of other sporting bodies, to make sure that people are within PGMOL who are Muslim feel wanted and welcomed by us as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and that is a really good document. I should have mentioned that one before. So yeah, if you're looking at wider faith, belief in the game will give you some examples of different faith groups that you might come across. And obviously, Essex is quite a diverse and broad county, so there's a good chance you'll come across some of those different groups. So that will be really useful. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So Aaron, yeah, stole your thunder a little bit there. So Aaron has had a really interesting career pathway to get here. So he was a football FDO, as we say in the game, at West Riding FA, grassroots officer at Kick It Out. He and I both shared that role. And the next one, quality manager at the FA, and now Aaron is in the grand position at the PGMOL. Aaron, do you want to give us a little bit of thoughts and insight on your career journey and any thoughts you had that might relate to tonight?
I think, yeah, I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you. I think it's really important that we reflect sometimes upon where we come from and where we've gone. So actually, my county FA journey started back at Manchester FA back in 2015 as a discipline officer, then on to Sheffield working in coach education and through those various loops. And some of the similarities that you will see across the county FA network is about the want and the will to do the right thing, to support clubs, leagues, players, coaches, and really live that ethos within the FA network of football being for all. What you will probably notice, particularly in the last couple of years, is there's been a real cultural shift to make sure that the equality, diversity and inclusion is at the forefront of everyone's mind. And that might be right from things like the equality standard and the code of governance through to organisations like Kick It Out and their online portal that they launched called the Academy, where you can go and learn about some of these sort of facets of EDI within your own time. I think the biggest bit that for me, Kevin, is seeing that cultural change going from only 2015 and sort of you know, we knew equality, diversity and inclusion's always been important, but it's actually about that accountability, that want and that drive to actually make that change. And I think for me, having seen that and now being part of that world, making, you know, I refer back to my own lived experience as a young child of dual heritage, sort of wanting to play football in the 90s, and the comparisons I'm sure many people will be well aware of about Asians and whether they're able to play football or not, to now where that would never be a question. And similarly within refereeing, about changing the face of refereeing. And some of the programs and people that I work with now live and breathe equality as part of their everyday life, which is how it should be to make football for all.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's really interesting. I guess we've come quite a long way from the days when we used to talk to sometimes county FAs and professional clubs about why equality is important. You know, we had to make that case and try and argue and say that, you know, it isn't just a luxury, it is sort of part and parcel of what everyone should do, to now it being sort of embedded into everything we do. The new code of governance for county FAs, if anyone hasn't read it, is a pretty big document. You know, you might want to put a few hours aside, but what's embedded into that is, for example, having the prelim level of the equality standard, which is quite a big ask, having an inclusion advisory group, having a youth council. So there's quite a lot of quite tough achievements every county FA has to go through just to access their minimum financial support from the FA. So sort of the FA has put the money where its mouth is. All county FAs have inclusion advisory groups, and they're all looking at how they can better serve the diversity of the counties they're in. You know, because there are 50 different counties and they're all very, very different. Lincolnshire compared to Essex, compared to London, compared to Birmingham are different places, and county FAs I've always had a good understanding of the football played within their boundaries, but I think they have a really good understanding of the communities that are playing that football within their boundaries now. So we've come a long way, and I think hopefully through webinars like this and other work we can move things forward even further. So I think is there any more slides? I think there might be one or two more. Yeah, so here we go. Here's a couple of those links. We've mentioned them already. The Ramadan Football Fact Sheet, the Muslim Council of Britain. So Muslim Council of Britain is almost the sort of governing body. It's almost the FA of Muslims in the UK. And they usually bring out some really good guidance. So they usually bring out a Ramadan guide, which goes into detail about fasting and mosques. There's an initiative they do called Visit My Mosque. So the majority of mosques, 200 to 300 in the UK, open their doors almost like an open day to anyone and everyone who wants to come in. So they'll usually have guides, they'll put on tea and biscuits. So if you have a look at the MCB website and you just fancy visiting a mosque, but you've always been a little bit scared to, you know, the same with Hindu temples, for example, then check out Visit My Mosque and you can just go along. I think going way back, it was probably a place I was a bit reticent to go to, but actually of all the faiths, mosques, I can say it's probably the most boring ones, because it literally is just a big empty room with some carpet. People come along for prayers and then go home. Not that much often happens within them. So you should always, and the most interesting thing are the people that are there. So if you get a chance, always go along and try and visit. And Muslims in Britain is a website which charts all the different mosques, where those people came from. So it's more of a sort of historical tracking of Muslims in the UK. And that guide that Aaron mentioned, I've just sent that to Millie, and hopefully if there's a follow-up to this, we can share with you that Belief in the Game guide. That's a guide which will talk about all faiths and how they might have an impact on football more broadly. And it's just an interesting read, if nothing else. So I think we've covered almost everything we wanted to with the slides. So now it's over to you there. If you've got any questions, I don't know if there's any already in the chat. I think Millie might have one or two from some other referee who can't be with us. But Millie, are there any questions there for us?
Well, we do have a number, Kevin. And I think the first one might be one for myself to pick up. So first question is, has Essex County FA made any adaptations to the County Cup schedule? I'm happy to cover that one off. So initially, the basic answer is we include Ramadan within our county cup schedule. So our finals fall between March and early May every season. So this season, last season, next season, there'll be a large number of seasons that are included within the finals stage, and obviously earlier rounds will become a part of that when we get closer towards the 10 day, every 10 the 10 days comes forward. Last season, for example, in our senior cup final, the event was held at Colchester United, and there was a break in play to allow for players to break fast. This was agreed between both teams, the referee, and everyone involved, and that's something that we do at all stages. So we try to make aware everyone through these events and through the training, through the sharing of the Ramadan fact sheet every year. This is our next step to taking it further. This year, the finals, when we've done the finals and we've looked to plan the events that will fall within Ramadan, we do include conversations with stakeholders around EDI. So inclusion is a part of every conversation, specifically when we look at those big events, key events in the EDI calendar, such as Ramadan. So yeah, Ramadan was considered as part of our planning stage, and we're still open if a club was to come forward and say we actually have a game that doesn't quite suit us, we'd still make changes as and when fits the players and as we can to best suit anyone that's taking part, referees, players, etc. Our next question, we have, this is an excellent training. Our football administrators receiving it. They're responsible for the competition and playing directives. Are all teams invited to engage, especially those without Muslim players?
Oh, say that bit again.
Are all teams invited to engage, especially those without Muslim players?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. In the training, yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. I was just thinking actually of other dates that might be relevant. So I know the Jewish faith has a month of lots of key dates, and they're mainly in September. So again, that's probably one that's even more important to probably get an AGM sometime in the summer, because there's a number. They're usually 1 or 2 day periods, but they all fall across sort of a period of 1 month. The Hindu faith, many people aren't aware, do have periods of fasting, and some of their fasts last 24 hours, as does the Jewish faith. There's one celebration where there's a 24-hour fast. So if those dates fall on football fixtures, they're something that would need to be changed. So absolutely, I mean, it's probably more important for people who aren't Muslim, because if you had Muslims in your team, you're more likely to be aware. So definitely, this is, football for all. I work in my day job, D&I, full time, and I think it's as important for people who are not from minorities to be aware, because obviously they're the allies, they're the majority. They're the people who are often inadvertently making rules and regulations and policies that exclude people without doing it deliberately. So it's just as important for people who aren't Muslim probably more important to have these trainings and to know about this work and this information.
Just to follow up on what Kevin said, this event tonight has been part of a series. So we have offered the same training, same webinars, but with slightly adapted content to league committee members, and next week there'll be one for club committee members. And this has been shared widely across our social medias, but also through emails going directly to providers. So the same way that referees would have received an email inviting them tonight, clubs and leagues also received the same. We're additionally going to be sharing these series, so we're running them as webinars in this style, so that we can record the events and share them across our YouTube channel as part of the webinar series, so that Ramadan doesn't just get spoken about during Ramadan. Anyone can access that information at any point in the season. So if you're looking to offer best practice as a referee, as a league committee member, or as a club, you could address the issue in September and say, right, I know that I've got X amount of players that want to fast during Ramadan. I'm going to speak to the league now. Or as a referee, I know that I'm going to observe Ramadan, or I know that there's a club or a team that have spoken to me previously that want to observe Ramadan, I'm going to address it with the league or speak to the clubs beforehand as soon as I get appointed to that fixture, just to make sure that it's okay. So that's something that's going to be widely accessible at any point to allow everyone to receive the same training tonight that would like to. I think we did just have a follow-up on this one around the uptake as well. We've got a good uptake from both sides, league committees. We had a number of league committees, including some of the main league committees that sit within our most diverse communities. These, obviously, as I said, these will be shared across the YouTube channel, so those that weren't able to make it will still have access to them as well. And clubs being next week, we've got good uptake so far. We've just got to wait, obviously, for the event to know how that finalises. Our next question is from Adrian. Thank you, Adrian, for this one. Adrian said, great work for the event, and how can you join the EDI advisory group? So our inclusion advisory group is an application sort of base, but we're always looking for new members. It's a group that runs through meetings throughout the season. At the moment, we're short on workforce representation from referees, so we'd be more than welcome to for people who are interested in joining to drop me an email after tonight and just state sort of why you're interested, and we can open conversations about joining going forward and what that sort of looks like. It's how many refs are invited, so it's not as much of an invite, it's more of an open group. We have a membership and a chair, and when we hold meetings, we look at sort of the strategy behind what we're doing and how we can include inclusion in every aspect of what we do. So it's really important that we get all the right people in the room with experience across all the different key EDI themes. So as I said, yeah, if you're interested in joining that group, drop me an email after this evening and we can continue that sort of discussion offline. Kevin, the next question is a specific question around stoppage of a match. So what time during a game do you feel is best to allow for a player stoppage for a player to eat or drink, and how long would you recommend that is for?
That's a good question. We did actually have that one on the other webinar.
We did, yeah.
Ooh, I might revert to, I've got a thought of what I want to say, but I'm going to ask Aaron if he's got a thought on this one.
I think, as always, it's about speaking to the person and making sure that you have an agreement in place before kickoff, and making sure that that is right for those people. And again, just in terms of the time as well. So for example, Kevin mentioned about the times earlier. So I would imagine a midweek evening kickoff that maybe starts at 7:45 if you are a club operating at that level, or if you are a referee officiating on a midweek evening game, would be one where that might be relevant. And as such, just making sure it's clearly penciled in and planned in before the game, and everyone is clear and aware on what's happening, will be crucial to making sure everything goes right on the night.
Yeah, I think the kickoff. So I think we said that the beginning of Ramadan is around 7:30 iftar. So you might want to, just push back kickoff by 5 or 10 minutes. If it was during the game, then a couple of minutes. Most people won't take on much, especially as A, they haven't been eating and their stomach's really small. B, they're in the middle of a football match. So I would say they'll probably want 1 or 2 dates and a couple of mouthfuls of water. That's what most people would have anyway, even if they're not playing football. But try and speak to them and ask them exactly what they want to do. And a couple of minutes, is probably the same amount of time you might set aside if someone got injured anyway. So as long as everyone knows well in advance, people are usually pretty supportive. The other teams who might not be Muslim might be genuinely interested to learn a little bit more. If someone was going to break fast after the game, they might even want to join in. So the more info, the better. But as I think my answer was going to be, it's a little bit like how long is a piece of string. I think it very much depends on the circumstances and using common sense. But if I were to put any sort of time, I would say a couple of minutes max. Cool.
Thanks, Kevin. And another popular question, but what would you do if the opposition team isn't very accommodating to players who are observing Ramadan or aren't keen to pause play, don't agree to before the match?
That's a good one. That I definitely will be asking Aaron this one, because I know you can't force people to compete on a date, but if they have agreed to play, then I'm not quite sure around the rules. What would you say, Aaron?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's about doing as much as possible before the game kicks off to be able to manage that scenario should it unfortunately occur. I would ensure that we're all clear, and you as the match official are the ultimate timekeeper at the end of the day. So it is your decision when the match pauses, and it is your decision when the match restarts. Obviously adhering to law and competition rules as such, but for me, I think it's about making sure you manage that scenario as best as you can, thereby allowing the person to observe their religion, because what we wouldn't want to see is for that scenario to happen, and then obviously we find ourselves with an abandonment of a game. So let's make sure we are calm, reasonable and rational before the game, making sure that everyone is clear on what the outcomes will be. And if there are any issues, I would implore you to report them to your county FA and to the respective league as well, to make sure they can follow up on them.
I've got a non-referee question here for Aaron. If the other team didn't agree, and would the player be allowed to ask the referee to go off for a minute or two, and they would be down to 11 players, and then just come back on when you give them permission?
So in law, as long as a player asks the referee's permission to leave the field of play and re-enter the field of play when they come back, there's no issues with that player ever leaving the field of play or coming back to the field of play. However, say for the fact that actually I would like to think that we live in a culture, in a society where we're able to be tolerant and inclusive, and therefore we wouldn't have to get to that situation where a team has to be reduced down and a person's playing time is reduced to be able to observe their religion, when in actual fact a stoppage of a couple of minutes that can be embraced by all as well. That's another thing to consider here. And if we look at those points you raised earlier about allyship and inclusiveness, let's make sure that actually we make football for all by supporting each other in that way.
Yeah, support that completely. But as I say, you plan for the worst, hope for the best. Millie, were there any more? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. That's all of them so far. Just to check before we finish up, if anyone else has got any final questions, if they could just pop them in the Q&A function right now for us, please. We'll give it 30 seconds.
Millie, just while we're waiting for that 30 seconds, so we've got a couple of other things. Kevin, you mentioned earlier about the different dates that are observed by many different religions and faiths. And actually, I've sent you both again, which can be shared. There is an EDI guide and calendar for grassroots football for this footballing season, where it goes through a very brief list of those dates across the calendar, which obviously is derived from the FA and can be shared with many of the organisations. It was one of the final bits of work I worked on before I left the FA, and was supported by our faith network, including the Rabbi Alex Goldberg and the faith forums for London as well. So we've got some really important information in there. There are some fantastic examples of ways in which faith and football have intertwined with each other, and how potentially a person or a club could replicate that, or a referee. And similarly, I implore anyone who is watching this or watches this in the future. About 18 months ago, the FA launched an EDI data capture process. You can view that by logging into my account with your email address and password. And on there, if you click on the tab at the top that says diversity and inclusion, I think there is a part there where you can fill out your EDI data, and that just helps to build that bigger picture of actually what does football look like, whether you are a player, a coach, a referee, a volunteer, a league official, and how can we make football more inclusive by addressing maybe if there are underrepresentations in certain elements as well.
Really good point. And of course, like all sensitive diversity data, it's protected by the GDPR rules, so no one can use that for any other purpose apart from it being anonymously aggregated. And just the BBC, as the FA know, how many people are playing football, what their rough diversity is, and if they understand that, they can make sure that the rules are relevant for everyone and put more suitable policies and programs in place. Cool.
Thank you. No more questions, so that will leave it there if that's all right, guys.
Brilliant. So thank you everyone for attending and listening to us. Enjoy your evenings and enjoy your football.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.